The rain fell in slick, oily sheets, plastering loose strands of auburn hair to Leah's temples as she wrestled with the rusted bolt on the diner's back door. It was a sound she usually loved. The percussive drumming on the dumpster lit a familiar city lullaby. But tonight it felt like a warning. The alley reeked of stale beer and desperation, a scent that clung to the cracked asphalt. She finally shoved the bolt home with a groan of metal and turned, her worn apron clutched in one hand. That's when she saw them. 3 shadows detaching themselves from the deeper darkness, blocking her only path to the street. They moved with the lazy confidence of predators who knew their prey was trapped. One of them, a man with a spiderweb tattoo crawling up his neck, offered a yellow-toothed grin. "Working late, sweetheart?" His voice was a gravelly insult. Leah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage, but she lifted her chin. She'd dealt with scum like this her whole life. "You didn't show fear." "I'm done for the night." "Excuse me," she tried to step around them, but the tattooed man sidestepped, mirroring her move. "Not so fast. We just want to talk." Across the street, parked in the deep shadows cast by a derelict warehouse, a black sedan sat silent as a tomb. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and gunmetal. Nico the Shadow Bellucci watched the scene unfold with cold, detached interest. This wasn't his territory, but he was observing a rival's operations, and this little drama was an unwelcome distraction. His cousin and underboss, Ricardo, shifted in the passenger seat. "Just some street rats, Nico. Let them have their fun. We have bigger concerns." Leo, his loyal consigliere, remained silent in the back, his gaze fixed on the alley, his expression unreadable. Nico ignored Ricardo. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, were locked on the girl. She wasn't cowering. She wasn't pleading. Her small frame was rigid with defiance, her chin tilted at an angle that spoke of unbreakable pride. He saw the slight tremor in her hands, but her voice, when she spoke again, was clear as a bell. "I have nothing for you." The tattooed man laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. He reached out to touch her hair. "Oh, I think you do." In the car, something shifted inside Nico. A low, primal growl rumbled in his chest, an instinct he hadn't felt in years. It was the same possessive fire that had made him the most feared man in the city. He didn't build an empire by letting wolves prey on his doorstep, even if it wasn't technically his doorstep yet. He watched the girl flinch but not retreat, her eyes flashing with a fury that mirrored his own. "Leo." Nico's voice was dangerously soft, a silken promise of violence. "Remind these gentlemen about the importance of respecting a lady's personal space," Ricardo scoffed. "For a waitress?" "Nico, this is beneath you." But Leo was already opening his door, another man materializing from the back seat. They moved without a sound, their tailored suits melting into the rain-soaked darkness. The confrontation was brutally efficient. There were no gunshots, just the sickening thud of fists on flesh, a choked gasp, a heavy slump against the wet brick. It was over in less than 30 seconds. The 3 thugs were left groaning in a heap, a lesson delivered in bruises and broken bones. Leah stood frozen, her back pressed against the cold, damp wall, her breath coming in ragged puffs. The 2 men who had saved her simply melted back into the shadows, their work done. Then a new figure emerged from the black sedan. He moved with the fluid grace of a panther, his expensive suit untouched by the rain that seemed to bend around him. As he stepped under the alley's single flickering bulb, the light caught the sharp angles of his face, the severe line of his jaw, and the unnerving stillness in his dark eyes. Nico Bellucci stopped a few feet from her. He didn't smile. He simply watched her, his gaze an almost physical touch, tracing the line of her throat, the defiant set of her mouth. "Are you all right?" The question was a low rumble, a formality that held no real warmth. Leah swallowed hard, her mind racing. She'd been saved from jackals only to be confronted by the lion. She knew who he was. Everyone in this part of the city knew of the shadow. "I'm fine," she managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Thank you." He took a step closer, close enough that she could smell the rain, the rich scent of his cologne, and something else, something wild and dangerous. "They will not bother you again." It wasn't a reassurance. It was a statement of fact, a declaration of ownership over the very air she breathed. His eyes flickered to the faded sign above the diner door. You work for old man Sal? Yes. He owes the Petrov family a great deal of money, Nico stated, his eyes never leaving hers. A cold dread washed over Leah. The Petrovs were his rivals. That's his business, not anymore, Nico said softly. As of this moment I own his debt. Which means I own his diner. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the suffocating air between them. And I own his staff. You work for me now, Miyakara. Leah's fear was instantly consumed by a white-hot blaze of indignation. Owned? Like a piece of furniture? Like a debt on a ledger? Her entire life had been a fight for scraps of independence, and this man thought he could buy her with a back-alley transaction. I don't work for anyone who thinks they can own me, she spat, her voice laced with venom she didn't know she possessed. A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps even amusement, danced in his dark eyes. Ricardo, who had now exited the car and stood lurking by Nico's shoulder, let out a derisive snort. You should learn some respect, girl. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Nico raised a hand, silencing his cousin without a glance. His focus was entirely on Leah, a predator mesmerized by the courage of its prey. I admire your fire, little one. But you misunderstand. He took another step, closing the remaining distance. He reached out, his gloved fingers gently tucking a stray, damp strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, a shock that jolted through her entire body. This is not a negotiation. It is a matter of protection. My protection, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was more threatening than any shout. In this world, you are either under someone's protection, or you are food for the wolves. I have decided you will be under mine. He straightened up, his formidable presence dominating the narrow alley. You will report to my estate tomorrow morning. 8 o'clock. Leo will give you the address. Don't be late. And with that, he turned and walked back to the car, leaving her trembling not with fear, but with a complex storm of fury and a terrifying, unwelcome flutter of fascination. The following weeks were a battle of wills waged in gilded cages. Leah was no longer a waitress. She was an unwilling resident of Nico Bellucci's opulent, fortress-like villa overlooking the city. She was given luxurious clothes she refused to wear and served exquisite food she picked at with disdain. Her job, it seemed, was simply to exist within his orbit. She served him his morning espresso with a deliberately sullen glare. She arranged the roses in the grand foyer, blood-red like the rumors that clung to him, with sharp, jerky movements. Every interaction was a spar. The soup is cold, he would comment, his voice a silken challenge as he sat at the head of a dining table that could seat 30. Perhaps it matches the company, she would retort, her chin high. Leo would sigh into his wine glass, while Ricardo would watch her with open hatred, hissing insults in Italian whenever Nico was out of earshot. But Nico never punished her for her insolence. Instead, he seemed to feed on it. He would watch her, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, as if her defiance was the most entertaining show he'd ever witnessed. He saw past the waitress apron and the sharp tongue. He saw a strength that matched his own, a purity that called to the darkest parts of his soul. He wanted to possess it, to protect it, to see if its light could possibly warm the perpetual winter in his heart. One night, a storm raged outside, mirroring the turmoil within the villa's walls. A deal had gone sour, a shipment lost. The air was thick with tension. Leah, unable to sleep, wandered into the cavernous library, drawn by a sliver of light from under the door. She found Nico standing by the fireplace, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He had shed his suit jacket, his white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and the sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing powerful forearms laced with faded scars and a single intricate tattoo of a coiled serpent. He was staring into the flames, his expression unguarded for the first time since she'd met him. The mask of the shadow was gone, and in its place was a man who looked weary, haunted. She saw a deep, jagged scar near his collarbone, peeking from the opening of his shirt. It was old, but it looked like it had been a mortal wound. An assassin's wound. You should be in bed, he said, not turning. He had sensed her presence as he always did. So should you, she replied softly, stepping further into the room. You're bleeding. He glanced down at his left hand, where his knuckles were split and bruised, A fresh wound from the night's violent business. He'd barely noticed. "It is nothing, let me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. Before he could object, she was there, retrieving a first aid kit from a cabinet. She gently took his large, bloodied hand in her small ones. Her touch was hesitant at first, then surprisingly steady. As she cleaned the cuts with an antiseptic wipe, he flinched not from the sting, but from the jolt of her simple, unadorned compassion. No one had tended to his wounds with such gentleness since his mother long since passed. He watched her, the firelight casting a halo around her bent head, her brow furrowed in concentration. For the first time he saw not a captive but a woman whose quiet strength was more formidable than any army. "Why do you do this?" he asked, his voice rough with an emotion he couldn't name. "Show kindness to a monster?" Leah looked up, her clear green eyes meeting his. They were so close she could see the flecks of silver in his dark irises. "I don't see a monster," she said, her honesty a blow to his heavily fortified heart. "I see a man who uses darkness to protect whatever light he has left." His breath caught. She saw him. Not the capo, not the shadow, but the man beneath. The one who was scarred, weary, and desperately lonely. He reached with his good hand, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his touch feather-light. The air crackled, thick with unspoken words and a dangerous burgeoning tenderness. He was drowning and she was the only air in the world. That moment of vulnerability became a crack in the dam. The tension between them shifted from adversarial to electric. Their verbal spars were now tinged with a deep, unspoken understanding. A shared glance across a crowded room held more meaning than an hour of conversation. Nico found himself seeking her out, not to issue commands, but to simply be in her presence, to bathe in the quiet strength that soothed the savage beast within him. He brought her a single perfect white rose one evening, leaving it on her pillow. It was a stark contrast to the blood-red blooms that filled the villa, a silent admission of her difference, her purity in his world of sin. Leah found herself watching him too, seeing the burden of leadership in the tense line of his shoulders, the flicker of regret in his eyes after a difficult decision. She began to understand that his iron fist was what kept a fragile, violent peace. He was a king ruling a kingdom of shadows, and she was the only one who had ever been allowed to see the weight of his crown. This softening did not go unnoticed. Ricardo watched them with a venomous envy that curdled his ambition into a treacherous poison. Nico's obsession with the waitress was, in his eyes, a fatal flaw. A weakness. Love was a liability in their world, a vulnerability an enemy could exploit. And if Nico wouldn't see it, Ricardo would make him. He began to scheme, meeting in secret with the Petrov family, the very rivals Nico was trying to crush. He fed them information, small details at first, about shipment routes and safe house locations, carefully curated to appear like Nico was becoming sloppy, his mind clouded by his new pet. He painted a picture of a leader distracted, a king weakened by a common girl. "He forgoes meetings to have dinner with her," Ricardo hissed to the Petrov patriarch, his words dripping with false concern. "He is compromised. His focus is gone. Now is the time to strike. Not at him directly. At his heart, the plan was simple and cruel. They would orchestrate an attack, not to kill Nico, but to take Leah. To prove to his men and his enemies that his affection for her had made him, and by extension his entire organization, vulnerable. The target would be a charity gala, one of the few public events Nico attended for appearances. He would be there, and Leah, at his insistence, would be on his arm. It was the perfect stage for Ricardo's betrayal. He envisioned the chaos, the fear in Nico's eyes, the moment his cousin would be forced to choose between his empire and his girl. Either way, Ricardo would win. Nico would be exposed as a weak, emotional fool, and Ricardo would be there to pick up the pieces of his fallen kingdom. The night of the gala was a symphony of sparkling crystal and whispered conspiracies. Leah felt like an imposter in the borrowed silk gown, a diamond necklace, a gift from Nico she had tried to refuse, cool against her skin. But as Nico led her onto the dance floor, his hand firm on the small of her back, the rest of the world faded away. In his arms she felt not like a captive but like a queen. His eyes were only for her, a dark possessive fire burning in their depths. "You are beautiful, Tesoro," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear. You eclipse every star in the sky for a moment. She allowed herself to believe it, to believe in this impossible fairy tale written in blood and secrets. But the dream shattered when the first gunshot echoed through the ballroom. Panic erupted. People screamed and scrambled for cover. Nico reacted instantly, his body becoming a shield for hers. He shoved her behind a marble pillar, his own weapon appearing in his hand as if by magic. "Stay here. Do not move," he commanded, his face a mask of cold fury. His men, including Leo, formed a protective circle, their movements a well-oiled deadly dance. But the attackers weren't aiming for Nico. Two of them broke through the chaos, their eyes fixed on Leah. They were Petrov's men. She saw it in their brutal, merciless faces. Before Nico could reach her, one of them grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. She screamed his name, a raw, desperate cry. Nico's head snapped towards her, and in his eyes she saw a terror that was far more frightening than the gun pointed at her head. It was the look of a man watching his entire world being ripped away. He roared her name, a sound of pure primal rage. But it was Ricardo who stepped into the path of the kidnappers, his own gun drawn. "Let her go!" he shouted, positioning himself between them and the exit. For a fleeting, foolish second, Leah felt a surge of hope. Then she saw the almost imperceptible nod Ricardo gave to the man holding her. It was a signal. A betrayal so cold and absolute it stole her breath. This was all his doing. The man holding her shoved her forward, using her as a shield as they backed towards a service exit. "One more step, Bellucci, and she dies," he yelled. Nico was frozen, a king checkmated. His empire, his power meant nothing if he couldn't save her. It was the weakness Ricardo had counted on. But he had underestimated Leah. With a surge of adrenaline, she stomped her heel down hard on her captor's instep and drove her elbow back into his ribs. He grunted in pain, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all Nico needed. The gunshot was a deafening crack. The man holding Leah crumpled to the ground, a neat dark hole in his forehead. The second attacker fell an instant later, courtesy of Leo. In the sudden ringing silence, only one person remained standing between Nico and Leah. Ricardo, his face a mask of shock and fury, his pathetic play ruined. Nico walked slowly towards his cousin, his steps measured and heavy, the gun still smoking in his hand. The ballroom was a tableau of fear. Guests frozen against walls, his men standing like statues of vengeance. All the noise of the world had narrowed to the space between these two men. "You," Nico said, his voice a low, deathly whisper. It was the only word he needed. It held a lifetime of shared history and a final damning judgment. Ricardo's bravado crumbled, replaced by a desperate, sniveling fear. "Nico, I was trying to help. They were going to kill you, I saw them. Basta." Nico's voice cut through the lie like a razor. "I saw the nod, Ricardo. Leo saw it. Everyone saw it." He stopped directly in front of his cousin. The love he once had for his family's blood now a cold, dead thing in his chest. He looked past Ricardo to Leah, who was being helped to her feet by Leo. Her eyes were wide, her dress was torn, but she was alive. She was alive. That was all that mattered. He turned his gaze back to the traitor. "You brought war to my door. You threatened what is mine. You did not do it for power. You did it because you are a weak, jealous child who could not stand to see me find something pure in this filthy world." He raised the gun, pressing it to Ricardo's forehead. Ricardo started sobbing, pleading in Italian, words of family and forgiveness that were now meaningless. "You broke Omerta," Nico said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You betrayed the family. You know the price." The final gunshot was not loud or angry. It was a punctuation mark. A final grim sentence in a chapter he was now closing forever. He didn't look at his cousin's body. He walked straight to Leah, his eyes scanning her for any injury. He gently cupped her face in his hands, his thumb stroking away the tears she hadn't realized were falling. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice raw. She shook her head, her hands coming up to cover his. "No. I'm okay." He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, inhaling her scent as if it were oxygen. He held her with a desperation that shattered his carefully constructed armor, letting her feel the violent tremor that ran through him. In front of his men, his enemies, and the cowering elite of the city Nico Bellucci, the shadow showed the world his one and only weakness, and in the same breath, his greatest source of strength. He had killed to protect her, and he would burn the entire world to the ground before he let anyone harm her again. The dawn that broke over the city felt like the first day of a new world. The villa was quiet, the bloody aftermath of the gala handled with the silent efficiency of Leo and his crew. The betrayal had been excised like a cancer, and Nico's rule was now more absolute than ever. But he felt no triumph, only a hollow ache that Leah's presence could fill. He found her on the terrace, wrapped in a soft cashmere blanket, watching the sun paint the sky in hues of rose and gold. She didn't flinch when he approached, when his large frame cast a long shadow over her. She simply turned, her green eyes clear and searching. He didn't have the words for what he felt, the storm of love, guilt, and ferocious protectiveness that raged within him. He had brought this danger into her life. His world had almost destroyed her. He stood before her, not as a capo, but as just a man stripped of his power and his pride. "I never meant for any of this to happen, Leah," he began, his voice hoarse. "I took you to protect you, but I was selfish. I wanted to keep your light for myself, and I almost got it extinguished." He looked out at the city, his city, which now felt like a pale imitation of the kingdom he found in her eyes. "You don't belong in this world of violence. You are better than it. Better than me." He finally met her gaze, his heart aching with the words he had to say. "You are free. I will give you anything you want, money and new life, anywhere in the world you want to go. I will ensure no one ever bothers you again. You never have to see me again." He offered her an escape, a return to the life he had stolen from her. It was the greatest penance he could offer. Leah listened, her expression unreadable. She stood and walked to him, closing the small space between them. She reached up and laid her palm against his cheek. His skin was rough with stubble, but he leaned into her touch like a starving man offered bread. "You idiot," she whispered, a small watery smile on her lips. "Don't you get it? You talk about my world and your world as if they're different places. The moment you walked into that alley, they became the same world." She looked into his soul, her emotional insight a key unlocking his deepest fears. "You think I want to leave? Nico, I have been fighting to survive my whole life. For the first time with you I feel safe. I don't love you in spite of the darkness, Nico. I love you because I've seen the man who holds it all at bay." His control finally snapped. He pulled her against him, his kiss a desperate, hungry claiming. It wasn't a kiss of possession, but of surrender. He was surrendering his heart, his soul, his empire to her. It was a raw, messy, beautiful confession of everything he couldn't say. When they finally broke apart, breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "Stay with me, Leah," he pleaded, the words torn from the deepest part of him. "Don't be my captive. Be my queen," she smiled, a real radiant smile that felt like the sun rising just for him. "I thought you'd never ask." They stood together on the terrace, a king forged in shadow and a queen born of defiant light, watching their city awaken below. Their love was a dangerous, impossible thing, a rose blooming in a field of gunfire. But can a mafia boss's heart, once claimed, ever truly know peace? Or is a love this passionate just the beginning of a more beautiful, more dangerous war? Let me know in the comments what you think of their epic romance. And don't forget to share this story if you believe even the darkest hearts can find their light. And tell me, what's the wildest thing you've ever done for love?